6 years ago, my sister stole the man I was about to marry. Now, standing at my mother's funeral, I found myself face to face with that same sister, Stephanie, as she walked in on the arm of the very man she'd taken from me. With her diamond ring sparkling and that smug smile playing on her lips, she turned to me and said, "Poor you, still alone." But what she didn't expect was my response. I simply smiled, turned to her and asked, "Have you met my husband yet?" And in that moment the color drained from her face. Because the man I had married was someone she never could have anticipated. My name is Rebecca Wilson. I'm 38 years old, and nothing could have prepared me for the emotional storm of that day. As I stood by my mother's casket, memories flooded back. 6 long years had passed since Stephanie betrayed me, and not once had I seen or heard from her or Nathan, the man I once believed was my future. I'd thought about this moment many times, wondering how it would feel to face them again. But instead of anger or heartbreak, all I felt was a calm, steady resolve. Stephanie had no idea who she was about to meet. Before I tell you how my sister's smugness dissolved into shock, let me take you back to where it all began. My mother, Eleanor, was always the cornerstone of our family. We were raised in a modest suburban home just outside Boston, and she was the embodiment of grace, strength, and quiet wisdom. Our bond was unlike any other. Even after I moved to downtown Boston and carved out a successful career as a marketing executive, I called her almost every day. She was my confidant, my advisor, my unwavering supporter. So when she was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer 8 months before her passing, my entire world tilted off its axis. The news was devastating, but she faced it with unshakable dignity, always more concerned about how we were coping than about her own pain. Her final weeks were spent peacefully, surrounded by the people she loved, in the very home where she had raised us. She died holding my hand, making me promise, through tears and whispered breaths, to find peace in my own life. 6 years earlier, when I was 32, things seemed to be falling perfectly into place. I had the career, a stylish apartment, close friends, but I still felt something missing. I worked 60-hour weeks, dated here and there, but never really found someone who clicked. That changed the night I met Nathan Reynolds at a charity gala. Introduced by my college friend Allison, Nathan was charismatic, polished, and magnetic in a way that turned heads. At 36, he was a self-made tech millionaire with the kind of story magazines love to feature. We bonded instantly over our shared love of art, travel, and ambition. After our first date, an elegant dinner at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the harbor, I called my mother and told her I'd met someone truly special. From there, things moved quickly. Weekend trips to Martha's Vineyard, box seats at the Symphony, cozy dinners at candlelit bistros. It felt like something out of a romance novel. Nathan was attentive, generous, and thoughtful, always surprising me with little gifts or elaborate plans. 18 months into our relationship, he proposed during a private dinner aboard a yacht in Boston Harbor. The ring was stunning, a 5-carat diamond that glittered under the stars. And I said yes without hesitation. My parents were overjoyed, especially my mother, who immediately began imagining the most beautiful wedding. Nathan could afford anything, and she insisted we plan something magical. Then came my younger sister, Stephanie, just 2 years behind me in age. Our relationship had always been complicated. As children, we were close, but there was an undercurrent of constant competition. Stephanie always seemed to want what I had, whether it was a toy, a friend, or my mother's attention. Eleanor worked hard to keep things balanced, giving us each our moments in the spotlight. I believed, perhaps naively, that we had grown out of that childish rivalry. In a gesture of goodwill, I chose Stephanie to be my maid of honor. My mother thought it would bring us closer, and I truly wanted to believe that too. When I introduced her to Nathan at a family dinner, Stephanie was immediately warm. Maybe too warm. She complimented him lavishly, laughed at all his jokes, and even touched his arm a little too often. I brushed it off as Stephanie being her usual charming self. At our engagement party, held at my parents' colonial-style home, she helped decorate the backyard with fairy lights and flowers. I caught her glancing at Nathan more than once, but each time our eyes met, she'd raise her glass and smile. Later that night, as we packed up leftovers in the kitchen, my mother gently voiced her concern. "Rebecca, dear," she said, arranging appetizers into containers, "I notice Stephanie seems quite taken with Nathan." I laughed it off, reminding her that Stephanie was dating someone else at the time, a pharmaceutical rep named Brian. But my mother wasn't convinced. "Just be careful, honey," she warned. "You know how your sister can get when you have something she wants." I reassured her that we were adults now. I believed Stephanie was genuinely happy for me. I was so very wrong. 3 months before the wedding, things began to shift. Nathan became distant. He stayed late at work, claiming meetings with international clients. Our usual Friday date nights were repeatedly canceled. replaced with excuses about deadlines and investor calls. Even when we were together, he seemed distracted, his attention constantly stolen by his phone. And slowly, the man who had once adored me began to pick me apart. My laugh, once music to his ears, was now too loud. My favorite blue dress, which he'd loved, suddenly washed me out. Even my nighttime reading, a habit he'd once called endearing, became a nuisance. At the same time, Stephanie started calling more often, asking about wedding details I thought only my mother and I were coordinating. "I just want everything to be perfect for my big sister," she'd say, sweet as syrup. With my work schedule packed, I let her attend some vendor meetings in my place. Then came the night at the Italian restaurant downtown. Nathan was glued to his phone. After the 5th time it buzzed, I asked lightly, "Is something else more important tonight?" He muttered something about work and product launches. But later that week, while doing laundry, I noticed an unfamiliar scent on his collar. Something floral and heavy. It wasn't mine. When I confronted him, he claimed it came from a female investor, Rebecca Mills, who wore strong perfume and had hugged him after a meeting. It sounded plausible. I wanted so badly to believe him. I even called Allison the next morning to share my unease, but she reassured me it was normal to feel anxious before a wedding. Still, the uneasiness lingered. Trying to reignite our spark, I booked a spa day, bought new lingerie, cooked his favorite meals. But no matter what I did, he drifted further. When he canceled our much-anticipated cake tasting, suggesting Stephanie go in his place because she knew his preferences, my heart sank. Why would she know those details better than I did? The next day, while cleaning Nathan's car, I found a silver earring wedged near the passenger seat. It was Stephanie's. I recognized it instantly. A gift from our grandmother that she'd worn to my engagement party. When I showed it to Nathan, he didn't even flinch. "She must have dropped it when I drove her to the florist," he said smoothly. "Didn't I mention that?" Stephanie echoed the exact same story when I called her. Too perfectly, in fact. That night, I couldn't sleep. Had they rehearsed this lie? My body began to show the toll. Weight loss, sleepless nights, eyes shadowed with doubt. I started seeing a therapist, privately. Then, just 3 weeks before the wedding, Nathan sat me down and suggested we postpone. "You're not yourself lately," he said. "Maybe we're rushing things." I broke down that night, pleading with him, begging Nathan to tell me what was wrong. What had I done? How could I fix it? He held me gently, whispering that everything was fine, but his eyes were vacant, distant in a way that chilled me. Later, I woke at 3 a.m. and instinctively reached for him, only to find his side of the bed cold and empty. From the hallway, I caught the sound of his hushed voice murmuring from the guest room. "Not now, she'll hear us. I know. Soon, I promise." The next morning, determined to reconnect with him, I decided to surprise Nathan at his office with lunch. Just as I was locking my apartment door, my father Thomas called. "Rebecca, are you eating properly? Your mother says you've lost too much weight. We're both worried."
"I'm fine, Dad."
"Really? Just wedding nerves," I replied, trying to sound cheerful. "I'm actually on my way to bring Nathan lunch right now." "Good. That boy better be treating my daughter like a queen." If only he had known. The security guard at Nathan's building recognized me and waved me through with a friendly smile. As the elevator ascended to the 12th floor, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall, trying to smooth the worry lines that had become a permanent fixture between my brows. I clutched the lunch bag, a pastrami sandwich from Nathan's favorite deli across from my office, and took a deep breath. At the reception area, his secretary Margot looked up from her desk, her eyes widening slightly in surprise. "Rebecca, we weren't expecting you today," she said, her gaze flickering quickly toward Nathan's closed office door and back to me. "That's okay," I said, lifting the lunch bag with a small smile. "I just brought him something." "Oh, wait." Margot stood abruptly, almost too quickly, as if to block my path. "Actually, he specifically asked not to be disturbed." Her nervousness sent a bolt of dread through me. "Is he alone in there, Margot?" Her pause said more than any answer could. Before she could speak, I walked past her, pushed open Nathan's office door. And the image inside is seared into my memory forever. Nathan was leaning against his desk, his hands resting on my sister's waist. Stephanie's arms were wrapped around his neck, their lips locked in a kiss that reeked of deep familiarity. They didn't notice me at first. I had several long, agonizing seconds to absorb every detail. Stephanie's skirt hiked up, Nathan's tie loosened, the way their bodies molded together like it wasn't the first time. When the door clicked shut behind me, they broke apart, 3 stunned expressions frozen in the room. "Rebecca." Nathan was the first to recover, straightening his tie awkwardly. "This isn't what it looks like." Stephanie didn't even bother with a denial. She lifted her chin defiantly and said, "We didn't plan this. It just happened." But a strange calm washed over me, cold, heavy, but steady. "How long?" I asked. Nathan glanced at her, then back at me. "Rebecca, let's talk about this privately." "How long?" My voice remained eerily calm. Stephanie answered without hesitation. "Since the engagement party. Months. Nearly half our engagement." While I was choosing floral arrangements and finalizing seating charts, they were sneaking around behind my back. Nathan moved behind his desk, putting space between us like he was preparing for a negotiation. "I didn't mean for this to happen. Sometimes feelings change. I was going to tell you." "After what?" I interrupted. "After the wedding? After the honeymoon?" "I was trying to find the right time," he said, using that same polished tone he reserved for smoothing things over with difficult clients. The lunch bag fell from my hand. "I trusted you. Both of you." Stephanie had the decency to look ashamed, for a second. "It just happened, Becca. We tried to fight it." "Don't call me Becca." That childhood nickname stung now. Nothing just happens for 4 months. Every text, every call, every lie, those were all choices. Nathan pressed the intercom button. "Margot, please come in." Moments later, Margot entered, her eyes carefully avoiding mine. "Please escort Rebecca out. She's upset." "I'm escorting myself," I replied, somehow holding on to my dignity even as my insides crumbled. "You two deserve each other." In the elevator, the tears finally came. By the time I reached my car, I was sobbing so violently I could hardly breathe. I don't remember the drive home, just that I ended up on the cold tile of my bathroom floor, curled in a ball, gasping for air as I called my mother. She and my father arrived within the hour, using their emergency key to get in when I couldn't make it to the door. My mother held me while I poured everything out between sobs. My father paced the living room, his face reddening with every detail. "I'll kill him," he muttered, clutching his chest. "Thomas, your blood pressure," my mother warned sharply, though her face showed the same fury. The days that followed were a blur. My mother helped me cancel wedding plans, gently but firmly making the calls to florists and caterers. My father managed the finances. When I returned the engagement ring, I left it with the doorman at Nathan's building. I couldn't bear to see his face again. Stephanie had already moved in. Her clothes were hanging in his closet. Our family photos had been replaced with ones of her and Nathan. The betrayal ran deeper than I'd imagined. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned that they'd been meeting behind my back whenever I worked late or traveled. Stephanie had pursued him deliberately, texting him, finding excuses to be alone with him, sending him pictures when I wasn't around. Friends whispered that they'd suspected something, even seen flirtation, but didn't want to get involved. Their silence cut almost as much as the affair itself. During those dark months, my mother became my rock. She brought me meals I couldn't eat, sat with me through long, tearful rants, and stayed overnight when the loneliness became too much to bear. She tried again and again to mend the rift between Stephanie and me, organizing family dinners, hoping for reconciliation. But those evenings always ended in silence or arguments. One night, after I refused to pass Stephanie the salt, she snapped. "You always got everything first, Rebecca, the grades, the job, the apartment. For once, I got something before you did." "My fiancé wasn't a trophy to win," I said, my voice trembling. "He was someone I loved, trusted." My mother set down her fork. "Stephanie Marie Thompson, apologize to your sister right now." "For what? Being honest?"
N'attends chose me.
"He loves me now." I stood up, napkin clenched in my fist, heart aching. "I can't do this anymore, Mom. I'm sorry." It was the last time I attended a family dinner with Stephanie present. The stress of our feud took its toll on my father's health. His blood pressure spiked, requiring new medication and more doctor visits. My mother aged years in mere months, deep lines settling around her eyes from trying to hold us all together. 6 months after the betrayal, I hit rock bottom. My therapist diagnosed me with depression and prescribed medication. My work began to suffer. I lost a major client after I broke down in the middle of a presentation, unable to stop crying. My boss suggested I take a leave of absence, but deep down I knew that staying in Boston, a city where painful memories lurked behind every familiar corner, would only prolong my suffering. So when a marketing director position opened up in our Chicago branch, I didn't hesitate. I applied immediately. The interview went surprisingly well, perhaps my desperation to escape read as enthusiasm. 2 weeks later, the offer came through. I accepted without hesitation. As I packed up my apartment, my mother came to help. She carefully wrapped photos and mementos in layers of tissue paper, her hands gentle but efficient. As we sorted through boxes, deciding what to keep, what to donate, she broached the subject that had hung silently between us. "Will you ever consider forgiving Stephanie?" she asked softly, sealing a box with a strip of packing tape. I kept folding sweaters, eyes on the fabric, not ready to meet her gaze. "I don't know, Mom. Not now. Maybe not ever." "Forgiveness isn't about them deserving it," she said quietly. "It's about freeing yourself." "I am freeing myself," I replied. "I'm moving to Chicago." She sat beside me on the edge of the bed, taking my hands in hers. "Running away isn't the same as healing, sweetheart." Tears welled in my eyes, and my voice broke. "I need space to even begin to heal. Can you understand that?" She nodded, pulling me into a tight hug. "Promise you'll call. Promise you won't shut us out completely." "I promise." Saying goodbye to my parents was harder than I'd expected. My father hugged me longer than usual, his voice thick with emotion. "You show them, kiddo. Build a life so good they choke on their regret." My first weeks in Chicago were marked by loneliness and doubt. My studio apartment felt cold and unfamiliar, like I was living in someone else's life. I worked long hours just to avoid the emptiness at home, eating takeout at my desk, collapsing into bed each night utterly exhausted. Then, as if to twist the knife even deeper, came the news. One Sunday morning my mother called. Her voice was cautious. "Rebecca, I felt you should hear this from me. Rather than see it on social media, Stephanie and Nathan got married yesterday. They'd had a small civil ceremony, yet thanks to Nathan's business ties, the event was featured in Boston Magazine's society pages. The photo showed them beaming outside the courthouse. Stephanie wore a simple white dress. My former engagement ring sparkled on her finger, like it had always belonged there. That night was my lowest point. I drank an entire bottle of wine alone, scrolling through old photos of Nathan and me, sobbing until my eyes swelled shut. I couldn't bring myself to go to work the next day. I called in sick, too broken to pretend I was okay. But something shifted in those dark hours. As the early morning sunlight filtered through my blinds, I made a decision. This would be the last day I allowed them to have power over my happiness. I deleted every photo of Nathan from my phone. I blocked both him and Stephanie on every social platform. I took a long, hot shower and imagined my grief washing down the drain. At work, I threw myself into my projects with new intensity. My boss noticed the shift, soon trusting me with larger clients. My reputation grew. People started recognizing my creativity and commitment. Slowly, my new life began to take shape. My first real friend in Chicago was Madison Reynolds, our HR director. She invited me to her book club, and through her I met other women, gradually building a new social circle. Madison, ever the matchmaker, kept trying to set me up on dates. I turned them all down, the idea of romantic vulnerability still too terrifying. 4 months into my new life, I was sent to a tech conference in San Francisco to represent our company. On the second evening, I attended a dinner with potential clients and found myself seated next to Zachary Foster, a tech investor and entrepreneur recently relocated from Seattle. Zachary was nothing like Nathan. Where Nathan had been flashy and charismatic, Zachary was grounded and sincere. His quiet confidence and thoughtful questions drew people in without ever commanding the spotlight. When he spoke about his work, his passion was obvious but never arrogant. At the end of the night, he asked for my business card. I handed it over, expecting nothing. To my surprise, he emailed the next morning, asking if I'd like to continue our conversation over coffee before the next day's sessions. Over the next few months, we stayed in professional contact. He referred clients to my agency. I introduced him to my business network in Chicago. Madison started raising an eyebrow at our frequent lunch meetings. "He likes you, Rebecca," she teased one afternoon. "And not just professionally. We're just colleagues," I insisted. "Colleagues don't look at each other the way he looks at you." Eventually, Zachary asked me to dinner, one not tied to business. I panicked. I nearly canceled twice but forced myself to go. 20 minutes in, as we discussed our favorite books, I had a full-blown panic attack. My hands trembled, my breath caught, tears welled. Zachary didn't flinch. He moved to sit beside me, speaking gently until my breathing slowed. He drove me home that night, never pressing, never questioning. The next day, flowers arrived at my office with a note. "No pressure.
No expectations.
Just hoping you're feeling better. Zachary." That evening I called him. I told him everything about Nathan, about Stephanie, about the wreckage they'd left behind. He listened, never interrupting. Then he shared his own story. A marriage that ended when his wife left him for his business partner, taking half of their company in the divorce. "Broken trust leaves scars," he said. "Anyone worth your time will understand that healing isn't linear." In the months that followed, we built something real. A friendship first. Zachary never pushed for more than I could give. He respected my boundaries but remained steadily present. On our 5th date, he made dinner at his place instead of choosing a bustling restaurant that might trigger my anxiety. When panic did creep in, he knew exactly how to help me through it. For the first time since Nathan, I began to believe that trust might be possible again. 1 year after moving to Chicago, I barely recognized my life. I had been promoted to senior marketing director. I worked in a corner office overlooking the river. My social circle had grown beyond Madison, full of genuine friendships. Most unexpectedly, I had fallen deeply in love with Zachary. Unlike Nathan's performative courtship, Zachary's love showed itself in small, consistent ways. He remembered how I took my coffee with oat milk. He knew which true crime podcasts I followed. He respected my independence but never made me feel alone. Most importantly, he never compared me to anyone else. He never tried to change me. I met his sister Caroline during one of her visits from Portland. We hit it off immediately, exchanging numbers, building a friendship of our own. She shared stories from their childhood in Seattle, helping me see the boy who had grown into the man I loved. My relationship with my parents continued from afar. I called my mother weekly, though I steered our conversations away from Stephanie. My father occasionally joined in, his voice softening as he told me how proud he was of the life I was rebuilding. I visited twice that year, carefully timing the trips for when Stephanie and Nathan would be away. My mother gave me the occasional update. According to her, their marriage looked perfect on social media. Stephanie posted photos of lavish vacations and charity galas. They bought a home in Beacon Hill and were deep into renovations. Stephanie asks about you sometimes, my mother said during one call. What do you tell her? I asked, stirring a pot of pasta sauce. That you're doing well. That you're building a new life. Does she ever express regret? My mother sighed. In her own way, maybe. She gets quiet when your name comes up. I continued therapy in Chicago. My new therapist helped me work through the betrayal and develop healthier patterns in relationships. The pain didn't vanish, but it became something I could carry without it crushing me. Slowly, I was finding peace. Not through forgetting, not through forgiveness, but through reclaiming the life that had been stolen from me. I began to understand the patterns of my own trauma, learning to recognize the moments that triggered me and how to communicate my boundaries with clarity and care. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the nightmares about Nathan and Stephanie began to fade. Then in June, Zachary surprised me with a weekend getaway to Michigan's wine country. We stayed in a cozy bed and breakfast tucked among rolling vineyards, spent our afternoons sampling local wines, and watched the sun melt into Lake Michigan during quiet, golden evenings. For the first time in years, I felt truly present, content and whole, without the ever-lingering weight of past betrayals looming over me. On our last evening, we strolled through the Chicago Botanic Garden, its early summer blooms stretching toward the light. Zachary stopped beneath a trellis blanketed in roses, took both my hands, and looked into my eyes with a gentleness that steadied me. Rebecca, he said, his voice warm with certainty. This past year, knowing you has been the greatest gift of my life. Then he knelt, pulling a small ring box from his pocket. For a split second, panic surged through me. Images of Nathan's proposal flashing like ghosts. But when I looked at Zachary, I didn't see the past. I saw love, steady, real, untainted. I'm not asking you for an answer today, he added, clearly sensing my hesitation. I just want you to know that whenever you're ready, whether that's tomorrow or next year, I'll be here. Tears filled my eyes. But this time, they weren't from pain or fear. Yes, I whispered. I'm ready now. The ring was simple and beautiful, an emerald flanked by 2 small diamonds. Nothing like Nathan's showy engagement ring. It was elegant, understated, and perfect, just like us. That night, I called my parents to share the news. My mother wept tears of joy. He sounds wonderful, darling. When can we meet him? She asked. Soon, I promised. Very soon. We decided on a small wedding, just 30 guests, held at a historic venue in Chicago. At my mother's urging, I sent an invitation to Stephanie, more as a gesture toward healing than from any real hope she would attend. Her response came by email, short and emotionless. Congratulations on your engagement. Unfortunately, Nathan and I have prior commitments on that date. Best wishes for your future. My mother was disappointed, but not surprised. Give her time, Rebecca, she said gently. This is still progress compared to where you both were. The wedding day itself was intimate and full of joy. Surrounded by my parents, close friends, and Zachary's family, I walked down the aisle on my father's arm. As he handed me over, he whispered, I haven't seen you this happy in years, kiddo. Zachary's vows brought tears to more than just my eyes. He said, Rebecca, I promise to remember that love is both strong and fragile. It needs care and commitment every single day. I promise to be worthy of the trust you've given me, knowing just how rare and hard won that gift truly is. We began our married life in Chicago, buying a brownstone that we lovingly renovated together. My career continued to grow, eventually leading to a vice president role. Zachary's firm expanded as well, shifting its focus to supporting women-led tech startups. At a business dinner one evening, a conversation with another investor took an unexpected turn. I used to work with Reynolds, a venture capitalist remarked. He and Foster had a hell of a rivalry in angel investing about 7 years ago. Foster backed the right company. His startup got acquired for millions. Reynolds picked the wrong horse and went bankrupt. That night, I brought it up with Zachary. You knew Nathan? I asked. I was going to tell you, he admitted. I didn't know the full story about what happened between you two, but I knew you'd been engaged to Reynolds when we first met at that conference. Why didn't you say anything? I wanted you to know me as me, not as someone connected to your past. Strangely, I wasn't angry. There was a kind of cosmic symmetry to it all, almost as if the universe had quietly set things right. 2 years into our marriage, we started trying for a baby. But as months passed without success, we found ourselves in a new chapter. Fertility clinics, tests, hard conversations. It was a difficult journey, but Zachary remained steadfast. Through every disappointment and every procedure, he held me, reminded me that family could take many forms, and that love didn't falter when faced with hardship. Then came the call that changed everything. My mother's cancer diagnosis. It was aggressive, already advanced. We flew to Boston immediately, met with doctors, and helped my parents understand their options. I took a leave from work and moved back into my childhood home to care for her. Zachary flew in every weekend, supporting not just me but my grieving father, who was unraveling by the day. In her final weeks, my mother and I had the kind of conversations that only come when time is running out. One evening, as I adjusted her pillows, she looked at me, her voice fragile but insistent. I wish you girls could find peace with each other, she said. Life's too short for this distance. I know, Mom, I whispered, choking back tears. Promise me you'll try, Rebecca, not for her, but for yourself, and maybe a little bit for your old mother. I promised. I didn't know if I could keep that promise, but I gave it to her anyway. She passed 3 days later, with me, Zachary, and my father at her side. Afterward, I made the call I'd been dreading. Mom's gone, I said when Stephanie answered. Her sharp intake of breath was the only reply for several long seconds. I'll be there in an hour, she finally said, her voice cracking. We met at our parents' house, hugged, briefly, awkwardly, and turned our focus to funeral planning. But the real test would come at the funeral itself, where years of pain would inevitably clash with fresh grief and our mother's last wish. The morning of the service dawned gray and damp, the kind of weather that feels appropriate for mourning. In my childhood bedroom, I stared into the mirror, adjusting my black dress, steeling myself. Zachary stepped behind me, placing his hands gently on my shoulders. I'm right here, he said softly, catching my eyes in the reflection. Whatever happens. Downstairs, my father sat in silence, staring into his untouched coffee. The past week had hollowed him. At 72, he suddenly seemed decades older. Ready, Dad? I asked, lightly touching his shoulder. He stood slowly. Your mother always said funerals aren't for the dead. They're for the living. I never understood that. Until now. At the funeral home, a crowd had already gathered. Family, friends, neighbors, people I barely recognized. As I guided my father to the front row, Zachary at his side, I heard the quiet stir of whispers behind us. I turned to see Stephanie and Nathan enter. Stephanie wore a sleek black dress, her diamond earrings catching the light. Nathan looked stiff in his tailored suit, his arm wrapped protectively around her waist. Her left hand rested atop her purse, the enormous engagement ring gleaming like a pointed reminder. My father tensed beside me. Breathe, I murmured, worried for his heart. They slowly made their way forward, pausing to greet attendees. I kept my eyes fixed on the photo of our mother beside the casket, her warm smile grounding me. Eventually they reached us. Stephanie hugged our father. He returned the gesture stiffly. Nathan offered a handshake, which was met with a curt nod. Stephanie turned to me. It's been a long time, she said, her expression unreadable. Yes, I replied simply. Nathan mumbled his condolences. Zachary had stepped away to speak with the funeral director, leaving me momentarily alone. Stephanie seized the chance. I need to speak with you. Privately. I hesitated but followed her into a small room nearby, clearly intended for quiet moments. She closed the door behind us. You look thin, she said, eyeing me critically. Grief does that. I replied coolly. She toyed with her ring. Nathan and I bought a summer house on Cape Cod, 8 bedrooms, private beach. We're thinking about starting a family. His company just acquired 2 startups. We're renovating for a nursery. I said nothing. Congratulations. I finally offered, my voice flat. Is there a reason you pulled me in here? Something about the funeral? Her smile tightened. I just thought you'd want to know how well we're doing. Poor you. Still alone at 38. I got the man, the money, the mansion. The old wound stung, but only briefly. I didn't feel devastated. I felt amused. Have you met my husband yet? I asked, genuinely smiling. Her expression froze. Husband? Zachary, I called, opening the door. Come meet my sister. Zachary stepped in. Behind him, Nathan appeared, curiosity morphing into visible shock. Foster. Nathan stammered. Zachary's expression remained cool. Reynolds. It's been what, 7 years? Since Macintosh acquired Initech over your pick? CompuServe. Nathan looked rattled. You two are married? 2 wonderful years now, I confirmed, sliding my hand into Zachary's. Stephanie blinked. Zachary Foster. As in Foster Investments? The same, Zachary replied calmly. Rebecca and I met at a tech conference in San Francisco. Nathan fumbled for composure. Foster, we should catch up sometime. I've been meaning to reach out. Maybe collaborate. My schedule's tight, Zachary said evenly. But feel free to contact my office. Just then the funeral director returned. The service was beginning. As we stepped back into the main room, I could feel the whispers trailing behind us. Our connection to Nathan now clearly recognized by many. No sooner had we taken our seats than my father clutched his chest, wincing in pain. Dad! I cried as Zachary quickly called for help. We moved him to a private room as a doctor, one of the guests, checked him over. It turned out to be stress, not another heart attack. Stephanie followed, her concern genuine. Is he okay? Should we call an ambulance? The doctor says he's stable, I replied, surprised by her sincerity. We sat together in strained silence, our only bond in that moment being worry for our father. When he insisted on continuing with the service, we returned to our seats. The tension had shifted, softened by shared grief. The funeral was beautiful, aching and poignant. I gave a eulogy that honored my mother's strength, her warmth and her enduring love. When Stephanie rose to speak after me, her composure cracked. She choked on her words, overwhelmed. Without thinking, I stood and walked to her side, resting a hand on her back. It's okay, I whispered. Take your time. She composed herself, then finished her tribute to our mother, weaving in childhood stories that brought both tears and gentle laughter from those gathered. At the cemetery, a soft rain fell as we laid Mom to rest. I noticed Nathan standing off to the side, detached from the group, checking his watch repeatedly. Stephanie, in contrast, stayed close to our father. The bravado she'd worn earlier had vanished, replaced with the raw ache of real grief. Later, the reception at our parents' house was packed with well-wishers bringing casseroles and sharing memories. Nathan drank heavily, his unease evident as several business associates engaged Zachary in lively conversation. I caught snippets about Nathan's company struggling with recent acquisitions, and I began to wonder if Stephanie's earlier boasts had been covering up a far more precarious truth. Throughout the day, I focused on what mattered, supporting our father and honoring our mother's memory. I carried myself with the dignity she would have expected, refusing to let old wounds distract me from the moment. As guests started to leave, I caught Stephanie watching me from across the room. Her expression was unreadable, but softer than I had seen in years. The day after the funeral, Zachary needed to return to Chicago for a critical board meeting. Are you sure you'll be okay if I go? He asked as he packed his overnight bag. I can reschedule. Dad needs help sorting through Mom's things, I told him. I should stay a few more days. I'll be fine. After I saw him off at the airport, I returned to the house to find my father sitting quietly in Mom's garden, a photo album resting on his lap. She labeled everything, he said, pointing to her neat handwriting beneath each photo. Someday we'll appreciate knowing who was who. That afternoon, I began the painful process of going through Mom's closet. Every dress told a story. The blue one from my college graduation, the floral print she always wore to Sunday brunch, the elegant gray she picked for my engagement party. As I sifted through them, I found myself talking to her, telling her about my life in Chicago, about my work, about Zachary, and the joy we had built together. In her bedside drawer, I found a soft leather-bound journal. Inside were entries written periodically over the past decade. Many reflected on her daughters, her hopes for our reconciliation, her quiet heartbreak over the distance that had grown between us. The final entry, dated just 2 weeks before she died, read, "My greatest regret is leaving with my girls still estranged. Eleanor always fixed things, but I couldn't fix this. I pray they find their way back to each other." Just then the doorbell rang. Wiping away tears, I looked out the front window and saw Stephanie standing alone on the porch. Nathan's car wasn't in the driveway. Dad had gone to his brother's house for dinner, leaving just the two of us. I opened the door, unsure what to expect. "Hi," she said quietly. "Can I come in?" In the kitchen, I made coffee while Stephanie sat silently at the table. Without Nathan by her side, she seemed smaller, less composed, more real. I set a mug in front of her and finally asked, "Where's Nathan?" "At home. He doesn't know I'm here." She wrapped her hands around the mug but didn't take a sip. I told him I needed space after the funeral. The silence between us stretched, weighted by years of unspoken words. "I'm sorry about yesterday," she finally said. "What I said at the funeral home. It was cruel. Completely inappropriate." I gave a small nod, acknowledging her apology without rushing to accept it. "I saw Mom's journal," she added. "Dad showed it to me last night. Her last wish was for us to reconcile." "I found it too," I replied. "But reconciliation takes more than just showing up, Stephanie. It requires honesty." She looked up, eyes wet. "You want honesty? I'll give you honesty. I've been pretending since almost the beginning." And then the dam broke. Words poured out between her sobs. She told me that Nathan had changed soon after they married, becoming critical, controlling. His business had been floundering for years. Every new acquisition, every attempt to rescue a failing venture, only pushed them deeper into debt. The lavish vacations, the designer clothes, the house on Cape Cod, it was all smoke and mirrors, propped up by borrowed money and sinking credibility. Their marriage, she admitted, was a performance, a facade carefully maintained for appearances and connections. "He checks my phone, monitors my spending, questions where I go. The Nathan you knew doesn't exist anymore. Maybe he never did. Then why stay?" I asked. "Shame," she answered instantly. "How could I admit what I did to you? That I ruined our family for a fantasy that turned out to be nothing. And there's the prenup. If I leave, I walk away with nothing." I pushed Mom's journal across the table. "Read the rest." She did. As the pages turned, fresh tears ran down her face. Eventually she looked up, raw and exposed. "She knew," she whispered. "She saw through everything." "She always did," I said. "I've hated myself for years," Stephanie admitted. "Every time Mom mentioned you, every time she proudly talked about your latest accomplishment, I felt the weight of what I did all over again. I'm planning to leave him, Rebecca. I've been working with a lawyer quietly." My feelings in that moment were complex. There was a sense of vindication, yes, but also compassion I hadn't expected. The sister who had once shattered my trust was now crumbling under the cost of her own choices. And I wouldn't have wished that pain on anyone. "I don't expect forgiveness," she continued. "I don't deserve it. But I needed you to know the truth before I destroy what's left of this false life." We spent the next several hours together, going through Mom's belongings, reliving memories, some painful, many precious. Stephanie recalled how Mom used to bake separate batches of cookies because I liked chocolate chip and she preferred sugar. "Remember the lunchbox notes?" she asked, smiling through tears. "A different message every day." "She never repeated one," I replied. We weren't suddenly healed. The wounds ran too deep for that. But as evening settled in, something had shifted. Mom's love had built the beginnings of a fragile bridge between us. "What will you do?" I asked as Stephanie stood to leave. "Wait until my lawyer says the timing is right. File for divorce. Rent a small apartment. Start over." She paused at the door. "What about you? Will you go back to Chicago?" "Yes. My life is there now with Zachary." "You seem happy," she said, not as a question but a statement. "I am. Truly. I'm glad. One of us should be." We hugged briefly and awkwardly. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a start. Back in Chicago, I resumed life with Zachary, our brownstone, my growing career. 6 months after Mom's funeral, I discovered I was pregnant. After so many years of trying, the news brought overwhelming joy, tempered with the sadness that she wouldn't be there to meet her grandchild. Yet in quiet moments I still felt her with me. Stephanie and I stayed in cautious touch. Phone calls now and then. Updates on our lives. She had filed for divorce, moved into a modest apartment, and taken a job at a small marketing firm. The whispers and judgment she faced in Boston's social circles were brutal, but she was determined to rebuild with honesty and intention. The path that brought me here wasn't one I would have chosen. Losing Nathan had once felt like the end of my world. But in reality, it was the beginning of a much better one. With Zachary, I had found not just love, but true partnership, respect, stability, unwavering support. His success never overshadowed mine. We each thrived individually and together. Mom had been right all along. Forgiveness isn't just about others. It's about freeing ourselves. Over time, the resentment and bitterness I'd carried began to dissolve, allowing me to see the past with clarity and the future with hope. The scars remained, yes, but they no longer define me. One afternoon, as I sat in our nursery, watching Zachary paint the walls a soft, calming green, I thought about the lessons I would one day share with our child. That loss can lead to discovery, that endings can open space for beautiful beginnings, and that the hardest moments often guide us toward our most authentic path. My life had become richer, more real, and more meaningful than I ever could have imagined during those dark days 6 years ago. Not in spite of the betrayal, but because of how it forced me to rebuild with purpose. Have you ever gone through a painful loss that eventually led you somewhere better? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. And if this journey resonated with you, please subscribe and share it with someone who might need the reminder that pain doesn't get the final word in their story.